Hi, I'm Jacob. I'm the guy who's doing all the reading. Before I start, though, I just wanted to let you know about a couple trigger warnings before this section starts. This is going to be Chapter 1, the prelude and the preface of God Forgive These Bastards by Rob Morton. So I just wanted to let you know that there are going to be a couple moments of child abduction and child neglect. And if that doesn't sound like something you want to listen to right now, I totally understand. Go ahead and put this down, wait until you're ready, or if you're not ready, find something else to listen to. I totally understand. In addition to warning you about the content before I go, I also wanted to give a big thanks to Rob Morton for being a fantastic writer and for also being a beautiful musician. You'll probably hear some of the music from the album that this book was made around underneath of this. In addition, I would also point you toward Microcosm Publishing as a place where you can pick up the book and the album, and if you go check out their website, you'll find a lot of other awesome books and zines that are just good to read and kind of go in the same line. When you do order anything from there, I would point you toward picking up a couple of their free catalogs because they're super cool. They've got comics in them, and you can order as many as you want and hand them out to your pals, and maybe they might pick something up too. Without anything else, we're going to go ahead and get into the reading. Thank you very much.
Preface. The first time I met Henry Turner, I feared for my life. I remember the exact date, February 18th, 2007, because the day before, a close friend of mine had unsuccessfully attempted to commit suicide in his studio apartment, and I'd spent the entire night at the hospital. It was one of those terrible and typical Pacific Northwest winter nights, where the rain seemed relentless and the gloom was contagious, and as I waited at the sheltered bus stop on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard for the number 6 to arrive, a man approached me and asked for a cigarette. I shook my head and gave him a half-smile. Sorry, I quit a few years back. I stuck my head back into the newspaper I was reading, and he took a few steps closer. How about $1.25 then? All I need is $1.25 and I'll have enough for bus fare. I shrugged and fumbled around in my pocket. I'm using an expired bus pass myself, but I might have a few extra dimes. It ain't much, but if it helps, it's yours. I passed him the change, and when he grabbed it, he ducked down to my level and looked me straight in the eyes. Look at me. Does it look like a few extra dimes would help? You think a few extra dimes would do good to anybody? Take a look at me. I got a rotten heart and a bad shoulder, and I ain't had a good night's sleep in the past 10 years, and you want to know the kicker? I get fuckers like you tossing me their condescending extra dimes. He was tall and intimidating, with wild gray hair and deep wrinkle lines all over his face, and his eyes would occasionally roll up into his head, quiver, and then refocus. His thick, wet coat and his tangled beard had bits of crumpled leaves stuck to them, and he carried himself with a strange confidence of an angry and confused lion. And the best part about all this is that I know you're cheating me. And you know what I did to the last bastard that cheated me? He paused for a few silent, terrifying seconds. I bit his ear off. I almost pissed my pants. My brain was telling me, get up and run, but my body was frozen in fear, and I sat there, shaking in excruciating silence. I could see the bus approaching from about a quarter of a mile away. I did the math. From that distance, it would be another minute or so before the bus arrived, saving me from certain death. I could try to fight back, but while he was an old man, he was an enormous old man, and anyways, you can't just fight a crazy person. I could run, that was it. I was going to have to get up and run before he sunk his teeth into me or pulled out a knife, or worse. Suddenly, he burst into laughter. Not a maniacal laughter, but a booming, good-natured laughter, and his angry eyes became kind and warm. His snarl turned into a crooked smile, and he slapped me on the back like an old friend. I'm just fucking with you, kid. Ain't much for laughs around here. You'll have to forgive me. He held out his massive hand for me to shake. Henry Turner. Friends call me Hank. How you doing? I was still petrified. Was this some sort of trick? Was he gonna grab my hand and then snap it off like a tree branch? He looked me over and laughed again, reached into his pocket and pulled out a bus pass. Here, this one ain't expired. Go ahead, take it. I got a whole stack of them. And with that, the bus pulled up to our stop in the rain. The doors opened with a loud mechanical sigh, and Henry held out both of his arms, outstretched, in the direction of the doors. After you, kid. I didn't realize at the time, but He was a semi-celebrity around town, although most people wrote him off as just another of those crazy folks that told rambling, drunken tales, amusing for a few minutes, but best largely avoided. It was true, he had his demons. But he also had a magical, brilliant quality to him, and whenever I ran into him around town, I'd end up spending a few hours with him, if for no other reason than to listen to his unbelievable stories. It didn't really matter whether they were true or not. It was the way he told them, with absolute clarity and confidence, no matter how crazy they sounded. Some of it even checked out. He often talked about his years playing baseball with Georgia Tech, and the famous playoff game where he pitched a two-hitter in 1979. When I got home, I went on the internet and looked up the Georgia Tech roster from 1979, and there he was. Henry Turner, I'll be damned. The years went by. I'd leave town for a few months at a time, but when I came home I would always expect to run into Henry for the latest news and a ridiculous tale. Businesses closed and new ones opened. Houses changed ownership, new faces arrived and old ones disappeared, but he was like an ancient marble pillar, unaffected by the changes around him. Or so it seemed. In the winter of 2010, 3 years after we had first met, I ran into Henry on one of the downtown park blocks. He was disheveled and had those crazy eyes, and when he recognized me, he touched me on the shoulder and said something to the effect of, "Gonna go away for a while. You'll hold on to something for me, yeah?" He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a huge stack of unused bus passes, thrust them into my hands, and walked away. It was the last time I would see him. Henry Turner died on March 25th, 2010, a product of years of substance abuse and a tough life. If a funeral was held, I wasn't aware of it. The news of his death hit me harder than I expected, and it sparked an obsession. I began compulsively writing down every outlandish and unbelievable story he'd ever told me, as a sort of tribute. My band started working on an album of songs pertaining to Henry's life. My nights were spent researching everything I could find out about the Turner family. I would rant on and on to complete strangers about the whole ordeal, then slowly it began to subside. Life went back to normal. Though I never quite forgot about it, my utter entrancement with the Turners faded. What follows is an amalgamation of the stories Henry told me, as best as I can remember them. I hope I did him justice. There are a few embellishments and I took a few liberties, but like all good narrators, Henry knew that any story that was worth telling should be grand, significant, and a little bit false. It's important to note that Henry was no hero, and I'm not trying to romanticize or defend him. As you'll find out, he was a murderer, an abusive husband, an unapologetic drunk, and a crook who was haunted by his most awful moments. But he was also at times a tender, loving father, a brave adventurer, an amazing pitcher, who was surprisingly candid and an absolute charm to listen to. No person can be summed up by their worst actions, and despite his insistence that forgiveness ain't an inherent human quality, that's what this whole thing's been about for me. The capacity to forgive someone's most wretched moments. Ultimately, I think that when Henry was at his best, he was something simple. A kind, strange friend. Rob Morton. Prelude. Helen back. There was this sick son of a bitch down on West 119th and Zealous who used to collect cats. He had this big 2-story, must have been 200 years old, that he lived in, and along with maybe like 50 cats and a few dogs and shelves full of old paperback books and shoes that didn't fit anymore and just a bunch of trash. Piles of trash. Trash in the front yard, mounds on the side of the house, and a mountain of it in the backyard, and Lord did it smell. I was his neighbor for a few months, and whenever we were home, even when it was just in the middle of summer and the heat was just sweltering, we had to leave the windows closed to keep the rotting stink out, but to tell you the truth, even that didn't do much. You had to get kind of used to it. As the trash grew bigger, and the rats grew in number, which made the cats fatter, which made the whole scene that much more pathetic, a bunch of mangy, wheezing cats perched atop a castle of garbage, while the flies buzzed and the sun beat down. I don't know if he owned the place or rented it, but Jesus. So, right before I left town, he became famous for something I'm going to tell you about later. And when the reporters went into his house, guess what they found? Sure, there was crap everywhere, and it stunk, and the cats were hungry, and the rats were running, but on every inch of the walls were these enormous, intricate murals. They were just expansive paintings, and while they weren't as good as, say, that Mona Lisa picture, they were good in their own right. Sort of scrappy and full of life and death. When they asked him about it, he said they were pictures of bad things he'd done and the good things he'd done, and in some cases, the medium things in between he'd done, and that he'd worked on it for the past couple of years. They asked why. Why not put him on canvas that you could put in a gallery? Why put him inside your house where the only things that can see him are you and all your cats? And you know what he said? He said, well, that's just it. I wanted to give these cats something they could remember me by. I think that's nice. It's like, listen, this ain't for everybody, but if it makes those cats happy, then it's for them. It's a gift, you know? And it's something I never quite got the hang of, doing stuff that makes other people happy. But it ain't no thing, I guess. Some people were meant for it, others, not so much. I remember this one time years back, I was coming home off this late shift, and I ran into that crazy son of a bitch with all the cats outside his house. He looked like he'd seen death, pale as a motherfucker, sunken bloodshot eyes staring off into another world, and dirt caked underneath his cracked fingernails. I said to him, "You look like you've been to hell and back." He glanced up, noticed me, and let out this big sigh. "Something like that," he said, "but it ain't no thing." I think that's one thing you realize when you get older. You can get your ass handed to you time and time again, but as long as you can swallow it, stick it back down in the mud, you get by okay. Well enough, at least, to get to the grave singing your own damn song, with your own two hands doing the digging. For most folks, myself included, that's enough. But then, some days, it doesn't seem enough. You know, the days when it gets so bad that even your shoes seem like they're ready to quit, when the lights won't even turn on when you flip the switch and you end up face down on the floor, with a pocket full of things you don't even remember putting in your pockets, half-eaten sandwiches and elephant figurines. Hell, listen to me. I sound like one of those bastards at the bar crying to themselves over something they wouldn't give a damn about if they didn't have a drink. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is that some days I like to think about what it would have been like to be an inventor, somebody famous, like a piano player, one of those guys in the TV commercials that gets excited about how crazy low the prices are. Heck, even somebody that just left something nice to the world. Like that crazy guy I used to live to next door. Except without all the trash and the cats and the stink, you know? Child neglect case in Fulton County. Date of news release 10/18/1959. Atlanta, Georgia. On Friday, October 16th, 1959, at 8:38 p.m., Georgia State Police received a call from the St. Joseph Hospital in Atlanta concerning a 3-month-old child in the emergency room that had been transported to the hospital by Fulton County Emergency Medical Services from a residence in Fulton County. Child neglect was suspected by hospital staff. Detective Toby Gardner responded to the hospital where an investigation was launched. As a result of the investigation, August Turner, age 62 of Atlanta, Georgia, and Carolyn Jones, 47 of Atlanta, Georgia, were arrested by Detective Gardner and charged with criminal neglect first-degree child 12 or under, a Class C felony. Turner and Jones were lodged in the Fulton County Detention Center. Chapter 1. Not much cause for an emergency. Names are important. Where I come from, about as much as how well you live. I used to have this friend named Jimmy Bartlett who got his legs broken over something his great-grandparents did just because he shared their last name. The house Jimmy grew up in was bought under false pretenses in 1869 from another local family, Carmichaels, for the price of a horse and $200. When the Carmichaels realized they'd been taken, it was too late, and the courts were obliged to side with the Bartletts because a contract had been signed. Nobody ever forgot it, and nearly 100 years later, when Jimmy Bartlett was walking to school one morning, a gang of Carmichael kids jumped him with bats and just pummeled the living hell out of him. He was 9 years old. He never walked the same after that. And the funny thing was, he never did blame the Carmichaels for what happened. It was just one of those things. Me, I can't imagine not wanting to get some kind of revenge, but then I never had that kind of problem. I was named after Atlanta's favorite son, a Confederate soldier who was wounded and captured during the Battle of Gettysburg, my great-granddad. The story goes that Henry Gray Turner, upon capture, was held in a secret federal prison in Ohio, where he was kept in solitary confinement and tortured daily by Union thugs who were trying to squeeze out information on Robert E. Lee. But Captain Turner didn't talk, At the close of the war, they were forced to cut him loose. He came back to Georgia with the pride of the South in his heart and decided to get his revenge through politics, and sure enough, the 2nd District elected him their representative under the 47th United States Congress. He served 8 consecutive terms. First thing he did when he got to the House floor was declare the Turner name to be a curse upon all those who opposed secession, and that the great state of Georgia would remain free and independent of the tyrannical Lincoln grasp for as long as he served his constituents. And God forgive any bastard that believes otherwise. Georgia repaid the kindness by naming a county after him. Once he retired from politics, he married Lavinia Calhoun Morton, and they settled outside Atlanta into a big plantation house where they had their only son, Gus. They lived happily in that house for 5 years until one day, a man walked through the front door, went up the stairs into the living room where Lavinia and Henry were sleeping, pulled out a Derringer pistol, same gun used to kill President Lincoln, shot them both in the head. Whether it was a robbery or politically motivated, nobody will ever know, but it meant that Gus Turner, my granddad, was now a ward of the state. He grew up an orphan, and though he didn't much like to talk about his childhood, he told me this much. A lot of folks talk about forgiving them that harmed you. The way I see it, that's God's job. I ain't about to give the bastards that raised me a free ride to heaven. Forgiveness ain't an inherent human quality, he believed, nor should it be expected, and that was that. Gus was a welder and a true Southern drinker and a storyteller that raised my mama by himself, and then took care of her after she got pregnant with a stranger's baby. Never met the father, as far as I know. Mama never really did either. Nah, I'm not sure I didn't. For my grandfather's part, he never once gave her trouble about that. Just let it be and went about his day business in the shop and at night business at the house, as long as he was allowed to drink. So here's the important thing to take out of all this. I got a real distinguished family history, and whenever I feel too bad about everything that went wrong, it's nice to remember that I got stuff to be proud of, things that others don't have. Some folks got dishonorable blood, like Jimmy Bartlett. But the Turners have been doing significant things from the start. Even me. I was born on an August day that broke records. The way Ma would tell the story, you would have thought it was hell on earth. First time I heard about it was when I was 6 years old. It was the middle of summer, and she'd been riding my ass to get into the backyard to weed out the garden. But Mama, I said, it's too hot to be out gardening. That made her laugh. Too hot? Lord, I better not hear that talk out of you too hot ever again. Not after what I went through to have you. The day you were born was the hottest day ever recorded in the city of Atlanta. So hot that more than 50 folks died from the heat in the city alone. Folks can die from the heat, Mama? Mostly old folks and the homeless, don't you worry about that. Can you imagine, though? Dying like a crab in a steamer. She paused to wipe the sweat off her forehead. The day was August 23rd, 1959, a Sunday. You weren't supposed to arrive for another month at the very least, so me and your granddad were out in the front yard working on this wreck of a tractor that the neighbor, Levi Johnson, had run into the ground, and Lord, it was so hot, when my water broke your grandfather couldn't tell because of the sweat from my back. To be honest, I could barely tell neither, so it wasn't much of an emergency, at least at first. We called my cousin Ricky, seeing because he was the only one of us that had an automobile that worked. This old Ford truck that he brought back to life on at least 3 separate occasions, and he drove over a couple hours later, and me and your grandfather hopped in. It was supposed to be a 20-minute ride to the hospital and the big one downtown, but we didn't take that into account the traffic and the construction, and that's when the contractions started. Boy, I didn't know what to expect, but I'll tell you this much. You fought harder than your sister. When Lila was born, it was like a picnic on the 4th of July compared to you. So there I was, in labor, just sitting completely still in Ricky's idling truck in 100-degree downtown heat, waiting for the construction workers to flag us down through, when we see the workers take off their helmets, sit down on the pavement, and start eating their lunch. Just called it quits right there. Your grandfather grumbled something like, God, forgive these hands of mine because they're about to sin. He gets out of the truck and walks over to these construction workers. Doesn't say a damn thing, just socks one of them right in the gut as hard as he can. Big fight breaks out right there in the middle of the street with your grandfather swinging, the workers all screaming, and then out of nowhere the cops arrive. First thing they do is take a billy club to your grandpa's back, and on instinct, he turns around and breaks the cop's nose. There's blood gushing down the cop's face, everybody's screaming and fighting. Ricky just turns to me and shrugs. Now I've got tears coming down my face from pain, but both look at each other and start laughing like maniacs, loud and hard like we ain't never laughed before. This whole ridiculous scene. He puts the truck into gear, drives around the whole mess of people fighting, through the construction zone, right over to the hospital, where the nurses rushed me right into the delivery room. A few hours later, you were born. Took a cesarean section to get you out. We got a call at the hospital from the precinct saying they'd charged your grandpa with disorderly conduct and assault, but they let him go 2 days later with time served when they found out what he had been fighting about. Funny thing is, to this day, there's a big crater in the street where those construction workers had been. The boys never did fix that hole. It was some story. The granddad, in particular, enjoyed hearing it because in his mind he was the hero. He'd tell people he fought off 6 construction workers and a crooked cop so that I could be born. But ain't no thing, he'd say, just doing my duties as a grandfather. Now, maybe it was just his way of reminding himself that he was capable of doing important things, or maybe it was his way of forgetting what happened not so long after that. You see, nobody, and I mean nobody, ever talked about what my first few years were like. And if somebody brought it up, everybody would freeze and things would get real strange. From what I found out later, there was good reason. There were rumors in those days about a satanic cult run by this Mississippi man named Phelps. Of course, the truth was that Jake Phelps was opening a new church in town, a Mormon one, but the folks in Atlanta didn't like anyone bringing new religion into their city, so rumors started flying until it became the stuff of campfire stories and gossip. By the time they began laying ground for the temple, every kid knew it. If you ended up alone in the woods at night, the Phelps cult would slice off all your skin, hang you from a tree, and leave you to starve to death in the middle of the forest, where they'd later perform satanic rituals using your body parts once you died. Hell, if you got out of line, a kid's daddy might say to you, if you don't start acting right, I'm going to send you off to live with the Phelps cult. And you could be damn sure they'd start acting straight after that. Some kids even claimed that they'd seen a couple of skinned rabbits and squirrels hanging from trees near Nelson's ledges with pentagrams carved into the bellies. So it was something like 2 months after I was born, and Grandpa gets it into his head that he's going to go to show off the newborn Henry to the boys at the bar, so he sticks me in his lap, drives me down to the tavern. The boys are loving it, so proud to have a new grandfather in their midst, and they start buying Grandpa round after round, and he starts getting drunker and drunker, and before you know it, almost every person in that tavern's left. It's late, maybe a half hour until last call, and Grandpa's slumped over the bar snoring with a little baby boy next to his beer on the countertop, fast asleep. That's when the Banana Lady comes in. Every town's got someone like the Banana Lady, that half-crazy person that everyone's a little bit scared of, but she's got a charm to her, and since she remembers your name every time you see her, you sort of like her, even though you don't trust her as hard as you can kick her. So anyway, Banana Lady comes into the bar, and the far-off look in her eye, munching on an old brown banana, she sits down right next to my granddad. The bartender's off finishing up his closing duties, so it's just her, Gus Turner, and the baby. Hey Gus, hey there, wake up. She pokes him a couple of times on the arm, but he doesn't wake up. That your grandson on the bar? I heard about that, congratulations. Anyway, thought you should know that the Phelps folks got another one. Some lady just disappeared from her apartment. My bet is that they got her in the woods. Me, I wouldn't be caught dead if in those woods, no sir, not if my life depended on it. Grandpa's still fast asleep, but she keeps on chattering away. You know what I'd do if I had a little kid like you? I'd hide him away somewhere where the freaks couldn't get him, like a fallout shelter or a cave, just to make sure they were safe. It'd be the only right thing to do if you were a parent or, in your case, a grandparent, at least until the cops finally catch the fuckers. It ain't safe in the streets no more, believe me, I've been fighting those bastards tooth and nail ever since they got into town. The bartender's still off in the back, counting the money for the night, so Banana Lady looks over her shoulder and lowers her voice down to a whisper. Tell you what I'm gonna do, Gus. I'm gonna do you a favor. Let me have that baby of yours for a couple of days, week maybe, nothing more, and I'll keep him safe from the Satan worshippers. You'll thank me for this later. And with that, she slung me over her shoulder and walked out of the bar. They found me 2 days later in the Banana Lady's apartment, malnourished and dehydrated, with crusty little bits of mashed up bananas around my mouth. The prosecutor charged both her and Grandpa with child neglect, but since this was Grandpa's second run-in with the law in 3 months, they threw the book at him. Banana Lady got 2 years. He got 3. It was a widely publicized case, and the Atlanta Constitution-Journal did not paint our family in too kindly. Ma stopped reading newspapers altogether after that. It would be years before he and my mom reconciled, but With him being the only source of income for the household after he got out of prison, she had to eventually. Though she never forgave him, she did everything she could to make peace, but she never forgave him or forgot about it because, well, people don't forget things in the South. Jimmy Bartlett could tell you that.